So, this week's reading was A Dialectical Approach to Film Form by Sergei Eisenstein. I'll admit I found this reading pretty hard. He speaks in kind of like an abstract way, which is a bit hard to get your head round. And also because it was written in like the 40s, some of his language is a bit kind of outdated, so it's a bit hard to read, but I did my best. So he starts off by discussing Marx and Engels' thoughts on the dialectic system, saying that only the conscious reproduction of the dialectic course, or the substance, of the external events of the world. So therefore, the projection of the dialectic system into the brain creates abstract ways of thinking, and these abstract ways of thinking become like dialectical materialism, which is philosophy, which becomes philosophy. And then the projection of these systems, the dialectical systems, onto concrete forms is what creates art. At the foundation of this philosophy are two things. There's being, which is the constant evolution from the interaction of two contradictory opposites, and then there's synthesis, which is arising from the opposition between thesis and antithesis. The notion of conflict is central to art. Then there's always conflict in regards to three things. There's the social mission of art. So a lot of art makes people think, and it's there to make people think. And Eisenstein puts it as stirring up contradictions in the mind. The nature of the art. So it's like between the natural existence and creativity. So the way I thought of it was, if somebody was doing a landscape painting, there may be a ugly tree in the way. So they just kind of miss that bit out. So that's the conflict between it's there in the nature and in the actual what they're painting, but the creativity of it makes them not want it. And then finally, it's conflict in his methodology. In itself, art is a conflict. The dialectic of the art form is the logic of the organic form, which is nature, versus the logic of the rational form, which is industry. And an interaction of the two processes creates dynamism, which is a feature that Eisenstein talks about quite a bit, actually. So that, similar to the idea that human expression is a conflict between conditioned and unconditioned reflexes. So what we would, the conditioned reflexes, I guess, is what society places on us, whereas the unconditioned ones is kind of what we are just our reflexes, what we would do. So there may be some things that we would like to say to people, but we can't because society says it's not polite or whatever. There's an importance of rhythm in dynamism. Like poetry, you can see this in poetry, because it'd be really different if it didn't have a certain rhythm to it. It makes it flow better, it makes it poetry, otherwise you would just be reading out a few words. And rhythm in itself makes language more dynamic, and Eisenstein contrasts a few languages, some that are a bit boring and not stationary, but kind of they don't have much rhythm to them, as opposed to some of the more like classical languages like French and whatever. It says that the concept of the formally static phenomenon as a dynamic function is dialectically imaged in the wise words of Goethe, and he says that architecture is frozen music. So that's like the importance of rhythm in kind of all art forms. Eisenstein then moves on to the specific example of film, which he calls like the highest form of art. He's kind of big on film and cinema, it would seem. And he says that shot and montage are the basic elements of cinema. But the original montage definition, he describes it as somebody said that it was like different shots all put in together, and then how they came out, that was their rhythm. And he said that that's not a very good definition, so he offers another one, saying that montage is an idea that arises from the collision of independent shots even opposite to one another, the dramatic of principle. Within cinema and moving image, there is a synthesis of two counterpoints. The spatial counterpoint of the graphics to the images, and the temporal counterpoint of the music, which goes behind. And you can see that in a lot of films, that they always include music, and not just films, but any kind of filmed thing like TV and stuff. They always use music, and it makes it a little bit more interesting, really. Eisenstein asks, he says, why should cinema follow the forms of theatre and painting rather than the methodology of language, which allows wholly new concepts of ideas to arise from the combination of two concrete denotations of two concrete objects. So he's kind of saying that language is a more interactive, more rhythmic kind of thing than just images, and language can describe things a lot more than the traditional like art forms and theatre forms. And he kind of advocates like a new way of filming and a new kind of form of cinema, which kind of focuses less on completely portraying what something's happening. Like he talks about murder, and rather than using the film cliches of murder, which is like just a series of kind of images, he kind of advocates talking more about the feelings of murder, the whole everything that surrounds it, rather than the actual act. But he discusses the fact that those ideas kind of weren't taken up because sometimes they were seen as a bit more, the way that they were presented in the form, it was a bit more political. People saw it as a bit more political because kind of the experiments that he did were about, that he kind of mentions, were all about power and stuff, and the way that the power was presented kind of came across as a bit ideological and a bit political. So he said that nobody was kind of taking up those ideas, which he says is a shame. But he kind of finishes his whole article with a quote from Lenin and what Lenin thought of cinema, which I guess kind of is very political. But he kind of laments the fact that people aren't trying new things, which they are now, I guess. In the 40s, cinema had only just kind of started almost. So maybe he would have different opinions now. I don't know.